Welcome to 10 Talks, real conversations with champions for champions. I'm your host, Emily Love.
And I'm Carlette Patterson, your head sports life coach. And the desired outcome of our real conversations for champions with champions is to share our passion for sports life coaching. We want to get you coached, and our purpose for training you for a life that you love is we want to connect you to what matters to you in your life and the power of being a champion in your own life. A champion life is a 10 life. Hi team, welcome to 10 Talks. Well, I'm so excited today to introduce you to one of my dear friends who is a champion in the race car world. Have you ever wondered what it's like to be a race car driver? Well, today's conversation takes you into the world of Lyn St. James and really what it's like to be an American race car driver that has quite the extensive list of accomplishments. Lyn is only one of 9 women who have qualified for the Indy 500, and in 1992 she was the first female to win the Indy Rookie of the Year. In 2000, she was the oldest driver in the field at the age of 53. And in 1994, Lyn founded the Women in the Winner's Circle Foundation. Lyn is also an author and a motivational speaker, and you're just going to love getting to really step into our conversation and enjoy just hearing her journey. And what I love about bringing her to you today, team, is that our desired outcome is to really share with you what is it like to live your legacy, to go for your legacy, and to then, from a sports philanthropy perspective, be able to share it with others. So let's get talking with Lyn.
All right. So, Lyn, welcome to 10 Talks. We're really excited to have you joining us. And team, I just want you to know what a treat today is to really have such a superstar joining us, a total champion on our team. And Lyn and I met many, many years ago. We hang out kind of in the same sports world in terms of just passionate about sports philanthropy, passionate about coaching people up to really be their best. And so this is a huge honor for me to be able to share both Lyn with you and the world, and also with Emily, just bringing in our next gens and being able to take Lyn, who is just a rock star and legacy person, and to be able to introduce somebody that's literally living her legacy, still racing, still in the game, loving every minute of it, and also giving back in such a huge way. So Lyn, welcome. It's phenomenal to have you. And let's just start talking about your journey. I'd love for you to share the journey of how you got into this and where you are today, and let us just enjoy that with you.
Well, thank you, Carlette. You just made me feel like I'm a really big, important person, which I don't always feel. But anyway, to be honest, it starts to me, my life really started in my own way, I think in my own opinion, when I found the sport that I loved. I enjoy sports, and I enjoy playing sports. I enjoy watching sports. I enjoy life. I mean, so I don't make it sound like but I feel like a whole new part of me opened up and became just a huge part of me. And actually, I feel like it transformed me is when I found the sport of racing. And so, an automobile racing is a bit of a out of the mainstream type of sport, particularly back 40 some years ago when I started. But I started as a fan and spectator. So, I went to the races. I thought it was the coolest thing. I'm a car person. I like to drive fast. It made a little bit of sense from that standpoint. But, my background was I went to a girls' school. I took piano lessons. I kind of was a shy, quiet, trying to do everything society sort of wanted me to do. And I did. And I was okay. I thought I was fine. But I also felt something was missing. And so when I found out that there's actually people that race as a hobby, and that there's clubs you can become a member of, and I became a member of the Sports Car Club of America. And then I found out you had to go to a special type of driver's school to get a competition license. And then you had to have a competition license to be able to get on a racetrack. You learn this stuff, and you find out, you read the rules, you figure out what's available, what's possible. And I didn't think it was possible, but then I found out it is. And so it was, and I pursued it. Literally as a hobby, but it transformed me. I felt this sort of void that was filled because now I had this ability to do something that I felt really powerful, even though my first race car was a Ford Pinto. It wasn't a powerful car. So it wasn't just about the speed, but there was something about being isolated in that car where, you have a helmet and suit and people can't see you and they don't really know who's in the car. They're watching the car go around the track. And there was just something completing me that I have felt the first time I did it, and I feel it every time I get in a race car to this day. And so it all started with, I think, just finding the sport that I was passionate about and that fortunately I got pretty good at. And it's given me a whole career. So I just feel totally blessed. But that's how it started.
Well, I love your language of sport transforming you, the ability to do something that really it brought out the best in you and completing you. Like, oh my goodness, can we get any better than that, right? And, like score, okay, life is good. And then I really appreciate what you talked about in terms of trying to do what society really wanted you to do and still feeling like there was this tug inside of you that was like, I want to be and do what family wants and, what society wants, but there's something in me that I haven't quite discovered yet. And so talk to us a little bit about how you had the courage to go out and do that. I heard your process with it, but let's talk about your heart. Let's talk about what it felt like to really get in there and be like, I'm going to go for something that I don't even know anything about. I'm just kind of following this tug on my heart.
Well, I mean, when I went to the first type of event that was a club event, not a professional event, is when I found out about the school stuff and everything. And I was married at the time. And fortunately, my husband also loved the sport. And so he was the one that actually went to the driver's schools first. And so I was just there as what you would call the crew. I made the sandwiches, I did the timing, and I was there to give him his helmet. But at the same time, he saw my excitement and my enthusiasm, and he was a really good guy. And he said, after he completed and got his license, he said to me, "Do you want to do this?" And I said, "Oh, yes." So I mean, I
yes,
yes, yeah. And so, and then he helped me, and so that's one of the things about our sport. As I said, I love all sports, but most other sports, it's a team effort, or you are easily finding like-minded people. If you want to play golf, if you want to play tennis, even at the very highest level, there's usually clubs and places that you go and you show up with a racket, or you show up with the clubs, and then set a set of golf clubs, or you kick a ball. I mean, you can then become immediately a part of a team. But in racing, even though there's a lot of racers out there, you got to figure out how to get a car and then how to get people to help work on your car. And so it's a very difficult sport for almost anybody to get into. But I was fortunate that I had a spouse that said, "Hey, I'm going to do this, and I can see you love it, and you can do it too." And so that was the enabler. So, and then when I went to that first driver's school, you have these people who are instructors. And I remember my first instructor that I was assigned to, he wouldn't talk to me. I mean, I was with like two or three other students. And it was like he talked to them, but he just totally, I was like, I was invisible. And I was complaining to my husband. I said, I'm not learning anything. This guy won't talk to me. And he goes, "Well, go to the chief instructor and ask for a different instructor." And I went, "Oh, that's a very, unique thing." Yes. So I went and I asked for another instructor, and the guy said, "Sure." Gave me another instructor who was this Italian guy who was absolutely fabulous. He rode in the car with me. He drove the car. He talked to me, and he drew things on the ground and gave me ideas. And, it was very Italian, and very dynamic. And I learned so much. And so sometimes when you feel left out, or you feel you're being isolated, or you feel you're being, discriminated against, sometimes we just internalize that. And I think by just literally going and asking for a change, thank God I did.
Yeah. And Lyn, what I love about just this, beginning to understand your story, how old were you when you got into racing?
Well, I didn't start racing till I was 27, and in today's world,
that's phenomenal.
That wouldn't even exist today, as far as, and then having a career like I've had. So the world has changed a lot, obviously, in the last 40 years. But truly, I was later in starting, and I at least had some maturity. I mean, at 27, you've got a few life lessons that you've learned. And where today's world, so many of the young girls that I'm mentoring and the young girls that I'm watching, they are starting when they are literally 5, 6, 7 years old. They're having to deal with many of the same things that I dealt with. And I don't know how they do it, truly. I don't. I admire them greatly for being able to cope and manage. And and actually excel and succeed. But there's still obviously a lot of things they still have to learn, like we all do. But anyway, I started late for sure.
Lyn, we talk a lot about how in sports, the outside world doesn't necessarily see how hard things are, and in the inside, they see the accolades, the success, and and sometimes the failures, but we are really there in the day-to-day grinding it out. And you could look at your bio, it is so impressive, and you could see all of the wins. And we don't get a full glimpse of like what you were talking about, the pursuit you said of your sport, and how you didn't really know anything, so you just kind of jumped in and you started learning and learning. So will you take us through sort of that pursuit, as you called it, in your sport? Because there were a lot of things you had to overcome. And again, if we see your bio, we think, wow, that's just amazing, look at all of her success. But I know we'll be inspired to hear the ways that you kind of persevered and you really give us that inside glimpse of what it looks like to be a champion, because it's not always as glamorous as as the world thinks that it is.
So true.
Amen to that, right?
Yeah, amen to that. You don't have a long enough show for me to tell you.
Yeah, exactly.
It took a lot of years to develop those, sort of high points. And there's so many more lows than there are highs. I mean, there's seasons where, I did nothing but blow engines during the races. I talk about my failures when I'm speaking, because I think we learn more from failures than we do from success. And believe me, I had a lot of failures, and failures that I had responsibility, and then failures that just strictly show up. I mean, they just show up, and you have to own them because they happen to you, but they may not have been your fault. But my very first race after I finished driver's school, I'm out there racing and I'm thinking I'm doing everything right, and I lost control of the car and I spun out and I landed in a lake, and the car totally sunk. And it was my street car, that Pinto, that I drove to the track. I mean, they had to the divers had to go and dig the car out. And I had to figure out how to get the car home and dry it out. And, it was a huge failure right at the very beginning. And it caused me to step back and say, hey, maybe this isn't as cool as I thought it was going to be. And this isn't as much as I was excited and happy. I realized maybe I'm not any good at this. So, it was through that self-analysis over months. That's the other thing, when you fail in most sports, you can get back on the horse, as they say. You can get right back into it and satisfy that question as to whether you want to continue. I had to wait months before the next race, so I had a lot of time to tear myself apart, analyze it, and of course, I was the woman driver. Of course, she drove into the lake. I mean, I was, made fun of and criticized by a lot of people. At the end of the year, they gave me the Alligator of the Year award. But if you can't laugh at yourself and realize, and my husband, again, was a great ally and a great help, because he said to me, it all depends on how bad you want it, Lyn. How hard are you willing to
love
work?
that.
And
Yeah.
how bad do you want it? And so I had a lot of time to dig deep and realize, this is the most fulfilling thing that I've had in my life up to that point. And so I want it that bad. I want it bad enough that I'm willing to suck it up, take the criticism, take the joking, and figure out and learn, and realize that it was the best thing that could happen to me. Because had I had some early success, I think I would have probably had a false sense of confidence and a false sense of, oh, this is really cool. And instead, I had a comeuppance to saying, okay, how badly do I really want to do this? And look at here, 44 years later, I'm still doing it. And I'm still suffering from failures. I mean, I think you guys, Carlette knows that I'm sitting here because I've got a broken, fractured spine right now, a vertebrae in my spine, because I crashed 2 weeks ago. And, it wasn't my fault, but yet it happened and I was behind the wheel. So I have to take some responsibility for that. And so it's sport is very, I love our black and white checkered flag, because I think sport is very black and white. Everybody can have interpretations about what happened, but the reality is you're doing it in front of usually other people, so you can't privately have, oh, well, this didn't happen. Things happen. And it's a very, we have scores, we have lap times, we have things that define that is exactly the situation that happened. So you can't hide from it,
And Lyn, what I love in terms of listening to the power of failure is that we have a saying in terms of change, which is the purpose has to be bigger than the pain. So it really has to push us into anchoring into that purpose, so that all the pain that comes with it, the humiliation, the embarrassment, just the, watching our own film and having to admit that we're not who we thought we were, or we're not as good as we did, and we've got to dig deeper and figure it out. That's, your story just really radiates that you focused on your purpose more than you focused on your failures.
Yeah,
And you
I
learn
love
from
that.
them.
Boy, that's a
Yeah.
great. I've never heard that before, but purpose stronger than pain is exactly what keeps you going. It keeps you. That's lovely.
Well, welcome to our team, right? Now you can use that too. So that's the power of team, and you're just demonstrating it perfectly. And team, I want you to hear, she's recovering right now, and that's why I grabbed her real quick. I was like, you know what? We're going to make something out of this injury, and we're going to make something fabulous be okay with this. So, just being able to take something that she started 40 years ago, and even at mastery, and certainly we know, that Lyn, you're at mastery at such a high level, things still happen, failures still happen. And I love you saying, I take responsibility for it, and kind of take us through how you learn to do that. I know that the world is really good at being able to point out that there are so many factors that go into our failures, but eventually we have to own them and claim them and learn from them. So in your experience through life, what have you learned the most from really being able to take responsibility and also for your failures, and also just really have the courage to keep going for it?
Well, what I've done over time is I do as much after a failure. I do as much analysis and I gather as much information as I possibly can, basically to find out why it happened. And I remember back in the 80s, I can't remember what year it was. I was racing at Road Atlanta, and I had a great run going. It was probably about 1983, and I had a great run going in this car. I was on lap 60, and I was supposed to be coming in about 5 laps to do a fuel and tire change and driver change, because it's an endurance race. And I was coming through. I was in a run. I mean, I just was in the rhythm. I was in the just perfect. And then I lost control of the car. I spun and I hit a dirt bank, and our race was over. And I didn't get hurt. The car got hurt, sort of, but not too terrible, but just enough to put us out. And I must have sat for hours and hours and hours after that race was over. And I remember sitting up on a hill because I couldn't go home. I couldn't complete the day because I didn't know why it happened. And up to that point, I always felt I knew why things had happened that weren't supposed to happen. And I had actually a competitor that I knew pretty well, and he's like, "Lyn, what are you doing here?" And I'm like, "I don't know what happened. I have to know what happened. Did something break? What happened?" And he looked at me and he said, "Lyn, sometimes shit happens. I mean, sometimes it just happens, and you aren't going to always know why." And so it wasn't a lot of help, but it was help. I mean, and so but the analysis part has still been my MO. So I had a horrific crash at Indy in 2000 and during qualifying, and destroyed the car. And I ended up getting another car. The team owner got me another car, and I was back out on the track the next day. But I couldn't go home that night because I didn't know what happened. And I know that it wasn't just shit happens. I mean, I just knew something bad had to happen. I didn't know what it was, and it wasn't me. And I then found out, actually, a guy that, again, a former competitor, contacted me and said, "Lyn, come to the media room where we have the TV room. I want you to see this on film and see it in slow motion." And he pointed out where the tire actually separated from the wheel going into the corner, which is what caused me to crash. So once I found what I'm going to call the cause or a resolution, I was able to sleep that night, and not very comfortably, but because I was still pretty banged up. But I ended up, putting the car in the field the next day in qualifying, going through that same corner 24 hours later. So it's so I hope I'm not going around the circles too much, but it's finding as much as you possibly can about what happened and why a failure occurred. And even if it wasn't completely your fault, again, you were in the situation and it happened. So if you can learn from it and not try to have or hap that again, not put yourself in that situation again, And then if you can't, then somehow you've got to let it go. You've got to resolve with yourself that it happened, that shit does happen, and you've got to move forward. So learn if you can, and then kind of come to a resolution and then move on.
So, team, our tool for that is called Watch Your Film. And Lyn just described it perfectly. In sports, we use Watch Your Film all the time. Lyn did a beautiful job of talking about coming up, looking at the actual film and being able to process it. So we use that tool in our life coaching to just say, let's watch our film. In life, we don't really have anybody with the cameras on us that we can really go back in and watch our film, but we can in our brain, because we do know what happened. We don't get as good a view. Like, I love, Lyn, what you were talking about in regards to, you sat there in your brain and you went over and over and over, and you really couldn't figure it out until someone pulled you up and let you watch the film, and you could see where the tire, it had broken away. So, team, that's really what having a coach or a support team is about, is having someone be able to watch your film with you and point out or just draw to your awareness the things that happen, that when you're in the game playing, you've got to be focused on life and really playing your game. You can't be literally watching the film at the same time. So that just comes to our point about getting coached and being able to have a support team and having people around you that are for you, that aren't just telling you you're amazing, or that was somebody else's fault, or that should have never happened, but literally sitting beside you and being like, let's watch the film and figure out what happened here so that we can go out and learn from it and be much better about it. And that's a great support team.
Well, I'm going to share one more, though, because sometimes we don't have support teams. And in our sport, we are not structured with coaches as other sports are. And so those people that came to me were, not involved in my life other than they were friends who cared. But I had one, and this was a huge lesson for me. I had a horrific crash, which if you go to YouTube and put my name in crashes, this one will come up. It was in 1986 at Riverside. And you see the film. I'm upside down. I'm spinning. I'm on fire. I mean, it's a horrific crash of which I had no cause involved. I was a victim. But the point is, after it was all over, the team that I was racing for asked me 2 days later, "Are you okay?" And I said, "Yeah, I'm hurting, but I'm okay." They said, "Do you want to get back in a car?" And I said, "Yes." And so 5 days later, after that crash, I was at another racetrack, and I got in a backup car that all they were letting me do, which was so cool that the team thought enough of me to do this, that I got to go back in a race car and go around a racetrack. So I'm sitting in this car, strapped in, ready to drive out onto the track. I got my helmet on. I got all my gear on. And as I am leaving pit lane, looking through this windscreen that's exactly the same windscreen of the car that I was in 5 days prior, that I was in a horrific crash. And all of a sudden, the entire crash was happening in my vision.
Oh my gosh.
I am seeing oil and gas and everything going over the windshield. I literally had a replay that I was seeing.
Right. And yeah. Oh my goodness.
I have never in my life thought that. And so I am now, I'm driving slowly down the pit lane, watching this going, and I'm now talking to myself, and I'm going, no, real time. And I'm waving my hand like I'm trying to clean the windshield.
Right.
And so I had to clear that memory. And it's the best thing. I mean, it's the best lesson I could have ever had, because I know that came into play when I just did that crash that I told you about in 2000 during qualifying, is that you have to sometimes you have to learn to do this yourself. You aren't going to have a coach. Right. You aren't going to have somebody to point out or to help you guide yourself through it. So pay attention to every bad thing that happens to you, because every bad thing that happens to you could possibly come back and happen again, but you are in control of your brain, and you have that ability to be able to stop it and to be able to move past it and get into what I call real time, because that's exactly what I had to do. I had to get into real time, and it was so powerful.
What a huge winning strategy to really hear that, team, we're going to have failures. We're going to have, we call them emotional injuries, right? Because we're not racing on a racetrack at this point and having the physical ones. And so, but team, all of us are somewhat racing through life. And if you're playing hard and going hard for being a champion in life, we're going to have injuries. And that is just part of life. And you're hearing Lyn just, share that story so beautifully about not being anchored in the fear, but being anchored in the purpose of her love for driving, her love for racing, and just the love of sport. And Lyn, talk to us, because I think that's a big deal right now, just with our next geners and a lot of us that want to be champions. We have some anxiety. I mean, anxiety is showing up now in an epidemic way. And talk to us about what you've learned from the past. And I know you're mentoring and coaching up the next gens as well. Talk to us about what to do with that anxiety of performance.
Well, I'm still reeling about what the story I just told you. Actually, I'm kind of like that, because the purpose there was to drive around that racetrack in real time. You know what I mean? I had to change all of that into the purpose. So that was a great analogy there. But anxiety is part of being human, and you're going to have it. But I think that the biggest part is to be able to not deny it. Sometimes I think I'm going to place an analogy that may or may not be right in your mind, but anxiety to me would be about negative thinking. In other words, because anxiety brings negative, you're thinking something negative. I mean, if you're anxious about something, then there's some fear involved, or there's some negative place that's happening in your brain, which of course causes certain hormones to, and cells to develop and everything. And so how do you get a handle on that? And I call it stop negative thinking. And it's the 5 bars. I can't remember if I can remember all of them. But first you have to recognize you're having an anxiety, or you're having a negative thought. And then, so you have to recognize it, as opposed to letting it take power over you. You're just acknowledging it. This is just a negative thought, a negative thing. And then you have to replace it with something. And you have to go through that process of replacing it. You can't just try to deny it. You have to acknowledge it, recognize it, and not necessarily embrace it, but definitely recognize it, and then replace it, and then rehearse it. You have to rehearse that which you've just replaced it with. You have to do it over and over again. And then I got to remember the other 2 R's. I can't remember the other 2 R's.
Well, I love your real time. I love you bringing your brain to real time. Sometimes our brain can get stuck in the past, and we can be replaying the film of the past. And I really like you challenging us to recognize it and then bring it real time and say, I love your analogy too of just washing your hand being almost like the windshield wiper of like, no, let's get real time with this.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's part of life, and the worst thing we can do is trying to deny things. You know what I mean? Push them aside, as opposed to acknowledging them, recognizing them, and then replacing it with something else, because you have to. I mean, you have to. You can't, otherwise it's that baggage that you just carry around,
Lyn, I would love to talk about one of my favorite accolades that you have. You are only the second woman to qualify and race in the Indy 500, of which there have now been 9 women who have raced. And I just feel like that speaks again so much into that purpose over the pain. And talk about that accolade and sort of, you really fighting for a place at the top, whether it's, in a male dominant sport, in a male dominant world. I heard one of your TEDx talks on that, and I thought that was a really profound statement. And, regardless, male, female, you were just trying to be the best. But there's certainly a piece of that where we're now, the world is sort of bringing to attention, equal pay, equal opportunity. Talk to us about, your thoughts on that and what that felt like to be such a game changer in the sport that you were in terms of being a female.
Well, I was very fortunate. The timing of when things have happened to me in my life had been absolutely just phenomenal, and I have no control over those things. But when I think of starting racing in the 70s, and I didn't really feel I was part of the feminist movement in the 70s, even though I really was an active, engagement person in it. But I wasn't a bra burner, and I wasn't out there, yay, I'm a woman and I'm going to show you all. But, I was the woman driver on the racetrack, right? So, and then you get into the 80s, and I got the opportunity then to race professionally. And, and, and now I'm like spotlighted more, and I have more pressure. And I'm also being sponsored by Ford Motor Company, who also wants to use me as a spokesperson in the women's market to try to impact more women to look at Ford Motor Company as a vehicle of choice and as also an employer of choice. So I have a company who's sponsoring me, who's saying there's a woman out there and we're supporting her and she's doing these great things. But yet I'm also competing against all these guys, and I'm wanting all of my sport people, my in racing people to go, I'm just a racer, So I had to wear two hats. I had to wear that hat as nothing more than a purist race car driver, and I had to wear a hat of representing a company who was promoting the fact that I was a female in a male-dominated sport, and that they were proud of that. And I kind of wrestled with that. And then all along that same, in the 80s, I also became aware of the Women's Sports Foundation, and I got to meet Billie Jean King, one of my sheroes. And all of a sudden, I started to get out of my own way, because I realized that as an athlete, you are so much about yourself. You have to be spoiled. You have to be, all committed to your dedicated discipline of time and food, the kind of nutrition you're taking. It's all about you, because you're preparing yourself to your sport. But the reality is it's a very self-centered, selfish, isolated world, and that you live in, and that we do live in. But at the same time, it's not totally who you are as a human being. And so through the Women's Sports Foundation and getting to know Billie Jean and some of the other fabulous women athletes like Carol Mann and Donna De Verona, I started to realize that what I was doing possibly could impact others. And I became not only proud of that, I actually embraced it and realized that what I was doing actually could make a difference to a young girl in a sport, or for a young girl in school, or for a school administrator to make sure that they enforce Title IX. So I kind of, this power, it actually, it gave me more power. It gave me more energy. It gave me more of everything. And I grew through the 80s, understanding more and more, but still, competing as an athlete and being very selfish. Then I'm now the president of the Women's Sports Foundation. And next thing I know, I'm finally getting successful, after working so hard to try to get a sponsor, to actually race in the Indianapolis 500, which is the biggest platform in our sport. And so I reached the pinnacle of my professional racing career in 1992, at a time when I was the most ready to not just stand there as a woman, but to stand there representing the future. Mm-hmm. And so what I'm probably the most proud of is that I was able to continue racing, and I had a one race deal from JCPenney, sponsorship for 1992, the Indy 500 only. And during that victory banquet, out of nobody's preparation, including mine, I stood there and said, I'll be back. And I had no idea that was going to happen, or how that was going to happen. And the fact that I went on and raced for the entire decade of the 90s in IndyCar kept the topic going. And the fact that I raced well, and the fact that I was getting respect from my competitors, and I was getting respect from the industry, and I was getting respect from the fans, it enabled, I think, change to ultimately kind of, sort of, maybe start to turn a little bit. So by the time Sarah Fisher came in 2000, and there were two women for the first time in the Indy 500, myself and Sarah, I was the oldest and she was the youngest. And then that whole decade of the 2000s is when all of these other women showed up. And all of a sudden, essentially, after 30 years of women actually being there, Janet first and me second, 23 years later, the industry was saying, well, it's okay. I'm not going to say they did it with open arms, but they were just okay with it. And of course, the media still kind of made a big deal of it. But do you know what I'm trying to say? So I didn't want to be just a sidebar. I didn't want to just be, I was the second woman to race in the Indy 500. I won Rookie of the Year, and then she disappeared. I knew that not only was I still getting better as a race car driver, I knew that it was important that my staying power was there so that these young girls that I was helping mentor, like Danica Patrick and Sarah Fisher and the other girls that were coming through my program, who were like 10, 11, 12, 13, 14 years old, they needed a platform that they could open, the doors would be at least open for them. And thank God it worked.
Well, Lyn, what's amazing about this story is this is what sports philanthropy is. It's really about using your platform to help others. And we're introducing that to every level. Instead of it just being about philanthropy, being about money, we want to really be able to coach up people to understand that philanthropy is about giving hope. And that's where you can start. And for every athlete out there, for every person out there, for every life athlete, you hear Lyn talk about using that platform for something so much bigger than herself. And that's our definition of sports philanthropy, is just give hope, get out there, help people in any way. And also, Lyn, I love really hearing that you were aware of the fact that there was a platform, but you were somewhat of a rookie at how to use it or what to do, but you anchored in just being your best and focusing on how you could really support and coach up other people in a way of just living your life. It wasn't that you were telling people what to do. Another one of our sayings that I got from my coach, Martha Beck, is that you've got to live it to give it. And that's what you are doing in such a beautiful way, from, the beginning of this podcast to the end of it, just talking about how you're living your purpose. You're really, pushing past any fear or anxiety that's showing up, and injuries. We know we've got you injured right now, and you're going to be back in the car soon. And injuries show up in our lives constantly, even if we're a master at it. And focusing on, not only are you enjoying the journey of racing and a beautiful profession, and I know personally a beautiful life that it's created for you, but you want that third dimension of philanthropically really giving back and in any way that you can, and also really being like, I don't know exactly how I'm going to do it, but I'm committed to going for it.
Absolutely. And I think, one of the most powerful messages that I heard, I'll never forget it, when Billie Jean King was talking to a lot of the young athletes. And I remember her saying to them, you are your most powerful while you are competing. That is where you have the most power. Don't wait until you think you're going to retire, until you retire and then think you're going to go out and make a difference. You're the most powerful while you're competing. And in some way, I mean, I'm competing now because I love the sport, and I'm not competing professionally. I don't make any money at it. I'm just having, an absolutely grand time. But it's also keeping me relevant, and it's keeping me able to, I think, still have some power, and people give a hoot to what I have to say. And they don't have to go to their history books, I'm still
You're living it, baby. And you're living it in the best way. And team, we've just gotten to hear from a true champion talking about living a three-dimensional life. Personally, you hear her living for significance. Professionally, you hear her living for success, and philanthropically living for service and really giving hope. And this has just been such a 10 for us to be able to connect. And Lyn, thank you for really, giving us an opportunity to step into your life and to hear those stories, and most importantly, to be able to be inspired and encouraged. And all of us, whatever you're doing in life, we just want you, from Lyn's story to M's and I'm passionate about just serving and coaching you up to be your best self. Just, team, I want to say this week, go out and practice, really push yourself to go past that pain. So remember, anchor in the purpose being bigger than the pain. And if you're still trying to figure out what that purpose is, we've got lots of people to coach you up on it. You've got friends, you've got family. Keep being true to yourself. Lyn did a beautiful job of telling us about really finding herself, and she found it through sport, which really transformed her. And we're going to challenge you this week. Team, it's up to you to become a champion and go out there and practice, nothing but 10s.
Thank you for listening. Don't forget, tune in next week and head over to iTunes and Spotify and hit subscribe.
Remember, a championship life is a 10 life. You matter. Your life matters. Create a life that you love. Give hope to others, and be and choose nothing but 10s. Be you. The world needs you. Go to lifetrainingacademy.com.